Hello everybody and welcome to this month's Contract Administration Practice Group call. I'd like to take this time to introduce Jim Raines and Douglas Freeman, who are our co-chairs for this practice group. Let them say anything they'd like to in introduction today, or let Jim get going with today's presentation on substitution.
Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate everyone taking the time to be here with us today. Doug, is there anything you want to say before we get started, or we'll just jump right in?
We'll just jump right in.
Okay. We're going to talk about substitutions, and this is in the Construction Contract Administration Practice Guide on page 165, and this section is called Substitutions. It's 8.3, so if you have the practice guide and you want to follow along, make some notes there. I'd just like to let you know where we are. So what are substitutions? Well, I went to Webster's, and they say that it's the replacement of one thing for another. In our world here and in the practice guides that have been created so far, there are a couple of ways that we define or start to talk about substitutions. There are some circumstances that allow for substitutions, and we're talking about products here. Is a basis of the conversation. So in the first place, it's in the project delivery practice guide, and we reference there that there are some situations that allow substitutions to occur. Basically, within a project, the prescriptive information about how to make a substitution, whether or not they're allowed, the details of a particular project's stance on substitutions are typically included in Division 1. In the documents that we typically see, AIA document A701, which are the instructions to bidders, they don't allow for substitutions after the contract award. The EJCDC document C700 can allow for them, but directly discusses and addresses reimbursement of the owner and or the designer for the time and effort expended to consider substitutions. And I really wanted to start off with a question. Doug and I have known each other for a long time and worked on projects together, and I know some of his answers to this, but I'm curious with the participants, has anybody successfully on a project that was a non-private project, I'm talking about public projects here, has anyone successfully not allowed any substitutions after the contract award? And a typical AIA document, perhaps that's driven by an AIA contract, have you successfully not allowed any substitutions? Anybody? Matthew, you have to tell us if anybody raises their hand. I'd love to give them a second to say how they did that.
It looks like we have Stephen Rady. I apologize if I'm screwing up your last name. Has raised his hand. So Stephen, just type something in the chat box if you want me to unmute your line if you have a story here. Additionally, Kevin O'Barron has indicated that yes, I have not approved substitutions, but only relative to the EJCDC documents.
Okay. Either of them want to come off mute and sort of tell us how they pull that off, I'd love to hear that.
All right. We also have Kim Tuyet. Kirkpatrick has also raised his hand. He said that in his case, the owner doesn't want substitutions. It was pretty easy to be able to get past them. I have 3 hands up, and Kevin, you just raised yours. So I'm going to start with yours. I'm going to unmute you now. Hopefully, Kevin, you can hear us, and we can hear you.
Oh, hello.
Hey, Kevin.
Hi. Yeah, my experience is almost entirely with EJCDC documents, and in the current edition of C700, substitutions and or equals are addressed in paragraph 6.05. So it's a little more comprehensive than AIA in certain ways on this topic, just because it specifically addresses or equals. And of course, one of the differences between EJCDC and AIA is that EJCDC does explicitly allow substitution requests after the effective date of the agreement. And so most of my work's on public projects. We typically do have to have an or equal provision in for the specified manufacturers and products, and we usually try to ensure that there is at least one or equal in there. Somebody who can qualify under that. So when we get a substitution, the way I define it when explaining it to our staff is that an or equal is the equivalent to what's specified. A substitute is something that isn't the equal as in the eyes of the engineer. And so if I have a certain kind of process equipment specified for a project, and a contractor comes back and is proposing a substitution with something that is accomplishes the same job but a different type of equipment, clearly a substitution. And we have received requests for substitutes like that and rejected it. The tricky thing, and we've rejected it successfully. The tricky thing is that you almost never get an initial substitution request to the contractor. It's always an or equal. Have to clarify that this is not an or equal if the substitute additional information is required. And in the end, it goes to having the design professional understand the reason for their design intent as it's shown in the contract documents, and being able to confidently address whether or not a substitute will meet the intent of that design.
Right. Well, in my experience, thank you, Kevin, for sharing that. In my experience, most of the work that I'm familiar with is public work, is bid work, and has been based in the AIA documents. And even though it says that we're not going to do that after contract award, it's a pretty typical practice in North Carolina. Sometimes it's because maybe we weren't familiar with the product. It was something that we didn't know that really is an equal, and we had not researched it to include it in the documents. But often, and we'll talk about this a little later in the webinar, often it isn't an equal. Doug, you want to say anything about your experience with substitution?
First, let me say thank you to Kevin, regular participant, and we're always happy to have him on and share his experiences with us. The firm I'm with now, we do a mix of public and private work. On most of the public bid work, I do my best to limit, if not eliminate, substitutions post award of contract. And as we move further along in the discussions, I think we'll get into some reasons why that's the case. And on private projects, most of them are CM projects, and in those situations, especially when it's a fast-moving project, we will allow substitutions as we move along, because we may only, at the time we're developing the documents, be looking at one product as our basis of design and not even be looking at equals or equivalents or substitutions. So it's common for me in the private work to get substitutions requests. It's not as common in the public work.
As Doug talked about in the substitution request, typically this is a request to change a manufacturer, some product, material, or perhaps a system from what was included in the documents, and many times it does have some cost implication, and what you see on the screen there are where these references are in the various practice guides. But if we go to the next slide, what we begin to talk about are now the request procedures, and probably the most important part of consideration of substitutions is what you use in the contract documents in that Division 1 explanation. It's important to establish those procedures for exactly how you are going to process a request. And so those requests are going to vary sometimes. There are reasons that make substitution something that we have to deal with, but if, again, they are going to be something you're going to consider, then an explanation of the procedure, of how that is to be done, and who is to do it, who is to participate in it, as you consider that substitution is critical to have in the Division I documents. And as Doug has said before, as we were talking about this webinar, write the procedure and then be smart enough to stick to what you wrote and follow your own procedure. Have the material suppliers, the product representatives, manufacturers, the contractors, and perhaps your other consultants involved with the project to go through those documents appropriately, because it's really important to enforce the requirements so that you're sure that specific products or maybe approved substitutes, when they are used, are integrated into the project fairly, that you followed proper bidding requirements or negotiating requirements within the laws where you're practicing. And Doug, is there anything else you want to add there?
No, just a comment that substitutions, again, is not just a product or a manufacturer. It can be a method for construction, detail. I am always willing, if the contractor has a better way of putting a detail together, willing to look at it, especially if it's pre-bid. So again, I just wanted to point out that it's not just products and manufacturers. It can also extend onto methods of construction.
Well, that's a great point, and I'll touch on something that seems to be gathering speed in our area are stained or dyed polished concrete floors. And I have seen a real change from times that projects have been specified till implementation, that various subcontractors have a method, whether it's a patented kind of a process or not, they're very different in the way that they approach the installation of those kind of floors. And so there has been a real substitution in the way that floor is actually even installed. And some go all the way back to that. So that's a great example and great point that it isn't just changing the kind of manufacturer that you're looking at. Matthew, let's take a look at the next slide. I don't know how good you're going to be able to see this, but it is out of the practice guide in pages 166 and 167.
Okay.
And this is the
Jim, while that slide's
form.
popping up, we do have two things. One, Steve was unable to unmute because he doesn't have a microphone for his computer, I don't believe. But wanted to let you know that he indicated that in his case, with your first question, a matter of the contractor convenience and not acting on their bias to a timely manner, he has rejected contractor requests for substitution in keeping with the contract documents, indicating that the substitutions were non-equals. So I wanted to point that out to you. And then we do have two questions. One coming here from Tom asking, if the CSI substitution request form is used, doesn't it identify the means for the use of the substitution?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Sure. If the CSI substitution request form is used, doesn't it identify the means for the use of the substitution?
Well, it should. I mean, it should include the means, yes.
The CSI form is the next slide that's up on the screen now, and again, it's in the practice guide. Real briefly, the first information is project information, specification sections, drawing descriptions where we're referring to, and then the next section is a description or identification of what the proposed substitution is. The section after that is the reason for requesting the substitution.
Right, and I think, Doug, in the bottom half of that third section, the differences between proposed substitution and specified product is probably a portion of where some of the means start to get defined.
Right.
And then in that section below it, I'm sorry I interrupted you, is probably carries that forward with some more examples of the other installations it may be the same.
I like this form. I've used it in the past. I have since created my own form that kind of incorporates pretty much everything that you see here and then adds a little bit more. One thing that I have that I don't think the CSI form has on here is a comparison side by side. I want them to tell me dollar-wise what the impact's going to be dollar-wise, if this substitution is going to cost more or cost less. I want that, and oftentimes I'll ask for supporting documentation to go along with that to verify it. And the other thing that I don't think is on the CSI form is my new form. I list lead criteria, and I have them do a side-by-side comparison so they can list what we specified for lead criteria for the product or manufacturer that was in the spec, and then what this proposed product or substitution, what that criteria is, so I can see them side by side. Yes, this is going to do what we want it to do, or no, it isn't.
That's a good point, and I'm sure I don't think that information is here at all. It could be perhaps a reason that something got substituted that they may include, but you're right, there's not a comparison there. And I think, as Doug said, this form addresses many of the items that you want to stop and consider. Very important, going back to being diligent about what you specified. I've had this form come with big NA written in many of these spaces, and you know, typically there is no cost consideration, and they fill in 0 at that location. So getting a form like that we'll speak about in a minute, but obviously it is not consistent with the intent of what the procedure that you specified should include. Matthew, did we answer everybody? Did we address all the raised hands?
Sure, there was just some clarification indicating here that the reason that was asked about the substitutions being included in the form, the reason that was asked is that it seemed to have been indicated that potentially in the general conditions, the requirements are to be specifically identified. Just wanted to make sure that they understood that correctly from the conversation.
Right, right.
The general conditions typically, well, it's not general conditions where I do it, it's in Division 1, where I was in my Division 1 specifications require them to submit the substitution request form. So as a requirement of the contract, if you're going to submit a substitution, you have to use the substitution request form, and if you don't, I don't even look at it.
So in the general conditions, there may be other explanations of associated procedures with substitutions, but in in Division 1 is where I think Doug's saying he's created a whole substitution section. And do you include your form, Doug, in that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's a part of the contract documents, and they know from bid day, here's what I've got to do in order to change from brand A to brand B.
And I don't know if it's surprising or not, but it seems every project you get people that send an email saying, I want to substitute my product, and that's all they send is an email, and they don't send the form.
I think we'll touch on here in a few slides about some of the reasons why that's important to have a form and to have some response that compares these products or methods to get against one another. Matthew, are there any other statements or questions?
A statement / question here. The only problem with using the modified form that Douglas is indicating if the CSI CCCA test, it's possible that the test questions could be misleading if there is a modified form rather than a CSI form. So I guess an indication of if you start using similar form with the modifications talking about, that may be confusing for other people that are taking or have taken the contract administration certification through CSI.
Right. Okay.
Before we move to the next slide, Jim, I think one thing that, and I may be jumping ahead, I think one thing that's important about this form is that it's signed by the contractor, and when he signs it, he is making a certification to some statements. And those statements are on the form. It's at the top of the second page of the form. And I'm looking at it on the screen. I don't have a copy of it in front of me. Jim, I don't know if you can, I don't have my book with me either. I'm not at my desk. If you can just review some of those key certifications that the contractor is making when they submit this form.
Absolutely. First, that this product or system, let me say it again, that this proposed substitution has been fully investigated, that they have determined that it is equal or superior in all respects to the product that it's being compared against. Second, that the same warranty will be furnished as the specified product. Third, that the same maintenance service is available and source of replacement parts is available, so that the product specified and the substitution are, if one is off the shelf, then so is the other. That the proposed substitution will have no adverse effects on any of the trades. It's not going to take 9 more months to get this curtain wall system made somewhere else and thus negatively impact the delivery of the project. It won't affect or delay progress at all. Next, that the cost data is as it has been provided, so that, you know, if there is a savings or if for some reason there is an additional cost, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes when that might occur, that those costs are as stated, and that if there are any additional costs, acceptance of this substitution may subsequently become apparent that those are going to be waived if there were costs. That next, that it does not affect dimensions or functional clearances. It's all still accessible if that's what is in the contract documents. That if costs are applicable, that payment will be made for the changes to the building. If this affects some change in the building that isn't a part of the substitution, that the architectural engineering firm will be made whole. If there's any detailing requirements, that will be taken care of, and that if there is cost to the contractor for this substitution, that they will take care of those costs as well. And that finally all the coordination, installation, other changes in the work that are necessary will be completed to the satisfaction of the project in all respects. So if there's any associated or related issues, everything about this product and how it touches the building is to be consistent with the existing contract documents. And so those are the things that the contractor is certifying as specific statements of certification when they sign the form. So in consideration of these things we're talking about, when is it okay, when would it be okay to consider substitutions? Matthew, let's look at the next slide. So how about at the beginning, during bidding or perhaps negotiating on the job? Many of the firms out there will allow substitutions in the bidding process because they are able then to issue addenda that say this product is acceptable. We've taken a look at it as an alternative product or method, and we issue that to all the people who are plan holders to make the bidding process even and fair. During negotiating, depends on the type of the contract. Certainly in the private sector, maybe it's a easier thing to do than on publicly bid jobs. On a certain design bid build, though, if you do during negotiations begin to accept substitutions, then you're opening the door for a contesting of the bid by other contractors. And I'll stop here and ask a question too. I'd be interested to know if anyone has had that experience and would like to share with the group what impact that substitution had during the negotiating phase on their project, or how that came out. Matthew, anybody that raises their hands there, just let us know.
While folks are responding, I would just like to share on that first point. I think it is extremely important that, and I just want to emphasize that Jim already said it, that if a substitution is accepted and approved during the bidding phase, it is imperative that it be done so by written addendum so that it is shared with all parties and everybody's working off the same page. During negotiation here in North Carolina, they do permit you to negotiate with the apparent low bidder if his bid exceeds the project budget amount, to see if you can get it down to where it's in a, it's acceptable, where they can award the contract. Now, during that phase on a design bid build project, it would probably be the only time that I would consider looking at substitutions, is that in that on a public project with a design build bid, after bids are awarded or after bids are received, if the bids exceed the budget, you can enter into negotiations with that apparent low bidder, and if he has some substitutions that he wants to propose that might bring the bid price down, then we would look at those. May not accept them, but we'll consider them.
Look at them. All right. Matthew, anybody raise their hand?
We have a couple of comments and questions here. Two from Kevin here. One being, there's a significant difference between quote or equals and substitutions. Quote or equal is the equivalent of what's specified. Substitute is not the equivalent of what's specified. So there's kind of a note from Kevin here. But then he entered in here when he started to ask for questions. The AIA doc allows substitutes during bidding. EJCDC's preemptive case is not to allow substitutes or equals during bidding. The rationale for EJCDC's presumptive cases is that engineered projects such as process-type projects, there is insufficient time in the bidding phase to evaluate alternative equipment items that may have been under evaluation and designed by engineer for months or a year or more. And then he goes on here, one more comment saying, in more jurisdictions on public work, accepting a substitute for the contract assigned may be grounds for a bid protest. So I'll let you answer those comments from Kevin, and then we have two more as well.
Okay.
Again, Kevin, thanks for sharing, and I think Jim and I both agree with those comments I heard Jim acknowledging as they were said. But yes, certainly on a public design bid build project, accepting a substitution post receiving bids could certainly open you up to a protest.
All right. Absolutely.
All righty. So then we have comment here indicating how to respond if the request is substituted by a subcontractor and not necessarily through the GC. Many times the sub is a plan holder because of the size of the portion of the project, i.e. the HVAC sub.
Well, let me take a swing, and then Doug can bail me out here. First of all, if it is a single prime contract, if there is one contract signed with the owner, then it is that general contractor's responsibility to confirm and certify whoever that contract holder may be. Certainly, if it's an HVAC type of substitution and you have a mechanical consultant, then it would need to come through the general contractor to you, to your consultant, because actually, you know, the contract entities would be the general contractor for the construction phase and the architect for the design phase. So whether or not there are large subs involved, it would still need to come through those that hold the contract to make that certification. Now, general contractor probably isn't going to understand what they're looking at, but that's not the point, and they're held to be accountable as if they did understand once the document is, or the product is reviewed and certified.
For me, I think it depends heavily on the delivery method. If it's pre-bid and we are in some kind of a design build or CM situation, I'm going to insist that it come through the general contractor. If it's pre-bid and it's a public design bid build project, I would not, knowing what contractors have to go through on bid day or pre-bid to put numbers together, I wouldn't require them to handle all of the substitution requests coming from every manufacturer or subcontractor out there. I'd accept substitution requests from product manufacturers, subcontractors, pre-bid, without them having to go through the GC, and then if they're accepted, they're acknowledged in an addendum, and that addendum is distributed to all the plan holders.
And Doug, would you require your mechanical consultant, if that's who it was, to receive and review that?
I would not let it go directly to my consultant. It needs to come to the design lead in those cases when it's the architect. So say I've specified 3 air handling units, and there was a 4th company out there that wanted to get their product considered, that they should submit their substitution requests to me. I would forward it to my consultant. My consultant would make the determination yes or no, get that back to me, and then I would publish that in the addendum. Again, that's assuming it's a public design bid build scenario. I would not expect that 4th manufacturer that's requesting a substitution to send his substitution request to a GC. For one thing, he may have trouble trying to figure out which GCs are bidding it, and he'll have to, you know, track down a GC, get it to the GC, get the GC to agree to submit it. And I think that's just too much of a burden on him and too cumbersome a process. I would accept it directly from him, and then if it's during bidding, and then if it's approved, he can offer his product to whatever GCs that are out there that are bidding it that he can get in touch with.
Right. Probably happens that way more often than not when you look at substitutions in the bidding phase.
Now again, that would be totally different if we were doing a design build or a CM at risk project. If they contacted me, I would tell them, this is the CM, you need to go to the CM. Or this is the design build contractor, you need to go to the design build contractor. And they would vet it before sending it to me and before me sending it to my consultant.
Matthew, are there any other questions?
Yeah, there's actually one qualifier to the conversation you were just having, indicating who is not doing their job when that happens.
Not sure I understand the question. Who is not doing their job?
When what happens?
When what happens? If it's I get a substitution request that should have gone through a CM. I don't know that you can say anybody's not doing their job. You could, the person that the sub or supplier that's submitting the request, maybe they weren't aware, and you just send it back and say, no, this is a procedure you got to go through. And if they decide to follow or not follow the procedures, up to them.
They just clarified, indicating when it's sent direct to the engineers.
I always tell my engineers, if you get something that doesn't come from me, don't respond to it. Send it back and let me know. So I don't know that I've ever had a case where someone sent something directly to the engineer and the engineer had a conversation with them or whatever and said it was okay, and then we got into construction and or post-bid and something came through and we discovered, oh, wait a minute, that product wasn't approved by and addendum through the official. That's never happened to me. If it were to happen, I would chew out my consultant, number one, and I still would not agree to the substitution because it had not gone through the proper process, and it wouldn't be fair to the other bidders.
I would say a couple of things in addition to what Doug has added is, first, that probably in the contract documents, perhaps in the general conditions, maybe in Division 1, there is an explanation of how communication is supposed to occur and who the primary points of contact are. So probably had that contractor read those documents more thoroughly, they'd know that it was supposed to come through the architect. Well, any others, Matthew?
Yep, there are two more. One here is more of a point of reference from Alan, indicating a point to remember that the specifier has to define the conditions that a substitute must be submitted under Section 016000, product requirements and substitutions. So I guess that's more of a heads-up reminder for those people out there that may be taking notes on today's call. And then also Barry indicates if the substitution does not offer cost savings, then why consider it?
Great question. And I think often, well, I'll tell you what, let's take a look at the next slide and maybe we'll answer some of that question. So the question again was, when is it okay to, and should you look at substitutions, and what about after the award of the contract? Again, as Doug said, you know, when it happens at this point in the project, there are all sorts of unhappy consequences and opportunities that potentially could occur. However, there may be some things here to think about. First of all, it depends on the project delivery method. If this isn't a public design bid build, but perhaps is a CM project or a private project, there may be a reason to look at a substitution based on the delivery method itself. For example, there might be cost, time considerations in a substitution that could be a benefit to the project. So that might be a point after award that you would want to think about it. Some contracts have a shared savings clause between the contractor and the owner, and there might be an incentive there to consider a substitution. Again, all things considered, it being an equal product, but not listed in the specifications, and that might be a time to consider it. There may be a contractor who has certain experiences with certain products or absolutely installation methods or delivery methods, as Doug mentioned earlier, that may result in suggestions that could be a substitution, so that that contractor could bring their specific experiences to bear positively on the project. But in any case, when those substitutions are considered after the award of the contract, it's critical to focus on the project quality requirements versus whatever kind of value analysis at this stage there may be. So if there is a cost incentive, okay, that's nice to hear. What does that do to the life cycle cost of the project? Is it still going to be a positive impact after we consider that? So these might be some indications of when substitutions after the award could be or potentially be considered. Doug, you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree. Time would be a big one, which you could say time is money, and you may pursue getting some savings back, not because the value of the substitution is less or the cost of the substitution is less. It may be that it's going to take less time to put it in, so you save on labor. But constructability may be a reason for accepting a substitution where there's no dollars involved. Time could be another one. There's probably others out there that I just can't think of at the current time.
Well, this slide goes really closely with the next one. This is after award. Matthew, let's take a look at the next one and maybe catch questions or comments for them both. We won't be gone from this, but so what about substitutions after the contracts have been awarded and during construction? Well, that's easy. Just say never. Don't do it. The truth is, though, it should be held to at little to none. You may find yourself, though, in a situation where you just don't have any choice. One of the things that we're not talking about in detail here is how the designer is reimbursed for the time, the engineers, the design team, for the time it takes to really fairly and thoroughly consider a substitution. And if that's what is being done, perhaps the contract covers that between you and your client. But there may be an owner that has found the next new thing that they want included in their building, so you're sort of forced to take under advisement some substitutions. There may be some significant cost savings because this contractor is a certified installer of brand Y and can get it at a better price but doesn't have that same discount for brand X. If that happens, then there's a change order process to go through when money is going to be not dispersed based on the current contract. There may be a non-specified product that was used to create the low bid for a contractor to get the project, and it really isn't equal. This is where we've been talking about getting into trouble with opening up a contestment of the bid. I know none of you on this phone call would ever have this happen to you because you update your specifications religiously. However, there are architects that I've worked with who have products that are listed as or equals, or some that have products that their specifications based on where that product is no longer available. And we see a little more of this as companies acquire companies. Maybe a basis of design that isn't this company anymore, but has changed to a different company, and maybe the line has changed. So perhaps you consider a substitution when that product isn't out there anymore. And for some projects that take long periods of time to go through the design process, that could happen. And then finally, there may be, because of integrated project delivery, that there's a substitution change for various reasons that would positively affect the project. Of course, that's usually done in design and not during construction. But that opportunity may present itself as construction moves forward, again, particularly on big jobs where later phases would benefit from some change.
Real quick comment. Jim mentioned change orders here, so I just wanted to say quickly, when you are accepting a substitution, you are technically changing the requirements of the contract documents. Pre-bid, it's done with the addendum, because the addendum becomes part of the contract documents. Post-bid, it's done by change order. So it's not just a matter of signing off on the substitution request form. It needs to be incorporated into contract documents by a change order.
Right. So Matthew, with this and the previous slide, any hands up or questions about after award of contract or during construction?
Sure. There was one comment here, I guess of not necessarily concern, but a statement here. The problem with the design, build, or CM project, there can be a problem with the equipment fitting into the space allowed. It must be reviewed to make sure it fits. It's not unusual that the requested substitution meets the HVAC design criteria or other criteria, depending on what we're talking about here. But because of the size of the equipment of the substitution, it may not fit into the original design spec area. So checking dimensions could become a significant amount of time to confirm the clearances, and there is more to approving a substitution than just meeting the minimum design intent.
And that's why I had Jim review all those certifications on the CSI form. That is one thing that the contractor is certifying that he has checked, and he should check before he submits the substitution request.
And I would say if you've used that form, and if they have properly filled it out and signed it, and it's the basis of this change, then I think you've got a good spot to go back and say, you're going to have to figure out a way for this to work because you certified that it would.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't imagine, let's say, in the heating and air conditioning business, because we seem to be using that one as the example, I can't imagine as an engineer trying to keep up with the dimensions of every product as they're made today that are out there available that truthfully may be an equal product, but are not in their data bank of dimensioned information so that they could use it on a job. And so this is a great example of where there may be a true equal, and particularly because of size requirements. Renovation projects, come to mind. You don't want to change the size of the room, and what can we find that will fit here, as an example. Well, let's look at the next slide, Matthew, and talk about when substitutions are not okay to be considered. And we've touched a little bit on
there was one more comment here. Kevin wholeheartedly agreed with both you and Doug with it being necessary for the document substitution approval after contract extension by a change order. But then there was a question here about products may be equal, but warranty and maintenance and replacement costs may not be equal. This is especially the case of green buildings. Substitute products may not achieve LEED requirements, causing LEED consultants to look for other credits elsewhere. This majority of our firm's clients does not accept substitutions in those areas.
That's a great point, and what Doug was saying that he had tried to incorporate into the form, because absolutely that changes everything and there's a domino effect here. I think overall, as we talk about substitutions, proper planning and having the right specifications developed from the very beginning negates really the need to go through this process and makes a much tighter project overall.
And then lastly, with our comment we were talking about with the HVAC not fitting, what happens if it does get approved and the equipment is delivered and doesn't fit? What is the architect or engineer's recourse?
I think Jim touched on that previously. Is if you've gone through the process, the contractor certified that it fits, he's doing that when he submits a substitution request. That's the language that's on there. Then at that point, it becomes his problem to fix, and if that means he's got to go out and get a different piece of equipment, he's got to do that at his cost.
That's right. And that's real easy for us to sit here and say on the phone when 600 elementary school students are standing out front ready to go to school and we're not ready for them because of this. It's a whole different story, and these are absolutely very complex issues to try to address. So, you know, you're absolutely right. The contractor certified, and it uses that word, that this would not be an issue for us. So I think they have a big problem. In most cases, we're going to be involved in trying to help get that problem addressed as best we can for our client. But I think financially, they've confirmed that they verified that before they got themselves into this mess.
And then follow up to that now, indicating for Kevin, if it was approved using the change order system, why would it be entirely the contractor's problem to fix?
The architect's approval, my opinion, the architect's approval is based on the information that the contractor submitted. And the contractor certified on the substitution request form that it would fit, it would not be a problem. The architect's entitled to rely on that certification. So once it's incorporated into the change order and it becomes a change to the project, it's still going to fall back on the contractor, because all the decisions are based on him saying this is going to work.
That would be our first pitch. I'm deciding as we have these webinars that I want Kevin and Doug on my side of the room if I ever get in trouble. So when should we not consider substitutions? I think Kevin pointed this out at the beginning of the call, and Doug has talked about it before. It does not come in as an RFI. You just don't do it as an RFI. It's got to be through the substitution request process because it's not a request for interpretation. They're actually changing the contract document. You also don't do it if you just receive it as a submittal package. When it comes in the door and the contractor begs forgiveness because, after all, this is what they based their bid on and they thought you would accept it because they think it's an equal. Don't do this when you receive it as a submittal. Send it back. Open the package, send it back. Certainly you don't do it if it hasn't been reviewed and evaluated by the appropriate contractor, and we touched on this a little earlier. Maybe in the bidding process, when you can get that information out in an addenda that everyone can use, that's okay. But if it comes to you not through the contractor after that period, you certainly don't want to do it. Also, if its use will require substantial modification on your part, on the engineer's part, as Kevin said, on the evaluation of LEED certification, life cycle costing of the building down the road, unless you have a contract that says you'll be reimbursed for that. There's nothing that requires you to do that for free. And also, if there's detailed information that's lacking, the ones that I've seen with NA written on them, send them right back. Remember that request form and don't take those. Just turn them right around. So the next slide, Kevin, let's touch on this one. I know there are two more left, and I wanted to try to get through these before we got off the call. So how should those evaluations be done? First of all, we've been referencing the form. You want to use that form. Most important, be sure that it meets the contract document requirements. From the construction of the material itself all the way through the life cycle costing, and we could add here LEED certification. Do the general characteristics comply? Find out about the manufacturer. Have they been around? Are they technically capable? What's their track record? Take a look at the contractor installer. Same question. Or have they been around? Is this a product that they are familiar with, or more importantly, certified to install? What does the product rep say? Use them very carefully. I have many friends who have gotten in trouble because they listened to a product rep, but they didn't talk to the technical department within a company or manufacturer, and what the product rep said and what the product actually could do were not the same thing. Be sure that the life cycle cost is comparable with the product specified and that the warranty is the same thing. And don't forget that the burden of proof is on the person doing the substituting. not substation. They're not requesting the substation. Sorry about that. But really the burden of proof is on the one that wants to bring the product to the table. So what does that mean in review? Let's look at that last slide. Be thorough, follow your specification, do a detailed and complete analysis if there is a deviation, and be sure you spend the relevant time with that review. So you're going to look at a curtain wall system, maybe a little different than a towel dispenser. Dedicate the proper time to really consider what that modification is. And remember that it's okay to reject it. If it's incomplete, get it out of your office. The burden of proof is on the person that's sending it in, so don't keep that information hanging around. Get it back in their hands and say no immediately if it doesn't follow your requirements. But remember this is going to end up on you. As Doug said, we're relying on their certification that the product will do what it says. But we all know if something falls apart, we're going to get invited to that party just because we're there. So you want to remain in charge. You want to review in a timely manner and then respond with authority because this is your decision. And finally, you authored the contract documents. Be sure you stick to those. Use those as your guide. Go through consideration of substitutions. Doug, anything you want to add to that to wrap us up?
No, I would just, again, emphasize that the burden of proof lies with the submitter. If I don't have from them the information I need to make the determination, I'm going to reject it. I'm not going to, because I'm not getting paid for it. I'm not going to go out and do a bunch of research to try to prove or satisfy myself that what they're presenting is equal. They have to show me.
Right. Well, Matthew, that's the end of the slides, and we're out of time. Are there any last comments or questions that we can follow up on?
Yep, there's one quick question here for you. There's a couple of comments and a question here. The big one is, when rejecting, is an explanation necessary?
In North Carolina, there is a statute that requires, if you're going to specify by listing manufacturers of products, that you have to list 3 that are acceptable. That statute goes on to say that it is in the opinion of the architect whether or not there are other products that are equal. It doesn't say you have to explain why you're rejecting it. It just says it's in the architect's professional opinion. So if I ever get asked a question about why I'm rejecting a substitution request, I'll respond by it as my professional opinion that the product does not meet the requirements of the specifications, period. Now, other states may have statutes that say you have to explain it. I don't know of any that are out there, but I'm not versed in all the statutes from all states. But I know in North Carolina, no explanation is required, and I don't offer up one. The only caveat or change to that would be if I've got an owner that's asking me, and I'm going to explain to the owner why I'm not approving the substitution. And I'll get into the details, whether it's a warranty issue or past experience or quality or whatever it is. That's the discussion I have with the owner. It's not, I don't want to open myself up to a debate with a subcontractor, supplier, or manufacturer as to why a product is not being accepted.
Good point. I agree. Matthew, any others?
Yeah, we got some information here from Claude I want to pass along to everyone here as well. Indicates here that the owner will consider requests by substitution by the contractor if received within 60 days after commencement of the work. However, requests received more than 60 days after commencement of the work may be considered or rejected at the discretion of the architect. All substitutions reviewed by the architect should be billed directly to the contractor at prevailing hourly rates for time necessary to review substitutions. Does that sound right to you, or do you have comments on that statement?
The 60-day period, I think that's a function of how you're going to write your front-end specs. You can include that in there. You can make it 30 days, or you could just say we won't accept any post-bid opening. I've seen it done several different ways. So that description there is a valid approach that could be taken, but it's not necessarily the only approach that could be taken.
Any others, Matthew?
There's another really long comment from Claude. That's, again, more of a statement. I think with the time allotted, I'm going to pass on it for now, so sorry, Claude, on the call there. But there is a question that just came in here from Chuck indicating, without an explanation for rejecting a request of substitution, don't you invite the contractor to go to the owner directly in an effort to circumvent the approval process?
And,
go ahead.
yeah, I think Jim was saying that could happen, and it could happen. As Jim mentioned earlier, the lines of communications are defined usually in the front-end documents, and those communications are supposed to go through the architect. Again, if I don't explain it and the contractor goes to the owner and the owner wants an explanation, I will explain it to the owner, but I'm not going to get into a debate with a contractor.
Okay. We don't have any more questions at the moment, so you see the slide on here that just came up. Just thank you, everyone, for your participation in today's call. As a reminder that if you have any ideas or topics for future information or conversations for us to have, please feel free to share your ideas with Jim or Douglas. You can see their emails are on the screen here, as well as their contact info or reaching me directly can be reached through the contract admin website with the link that's in the chat box for everybody at csinet.org/contract admin. Jim or Douglas, if you have anything else that you'd like to do before we wrap up, or else we are a few minutes after the hour, and we appreciate everyone's attention and comments and questions for the day.
Right. No, just thank you for sticking around with us, and we really appreciate it and look forward to September. Doug?
Thank you all. We do appreciate it.